On January 14, 2023, David Thornton and his family arrived at a place that felt like the edge of the world. It was a rented wooden cabin, nestled deep inside Alaska's enormous Wrangell Street, Elias National Park. They were nearly 12 kilometers from the nearest town, a tiny outpost called McCarthy. Outside, the landscape was a blanket of white. Snow piled up against the windows. The air was so still it felt sharp and painful to breathe, and the sense of isolation was absolute. No neighbors, no phone signal, just miles and miles of silent forest and towering, jagged mountains. That first night, the cabin's heater fought a losing battle against the bitter cold. A persistent, icy draft crept up from beneath the bedroom floor. David, thinking it was probably just a draft from damaged insulation, or maybe even a nest of mice, decided to investigate. He got down on his hands and knees and pulled at the old, warped wooden floorboards under the bed. He had to pry them up, and as they gave way, what he saw beneath made his blood run cold. Under the floor wasn't just dirt and foundation. There was an old metal suitcase. It was rusted and corroded, but it was also wrapped tightly in layers of brittle, black electrical tape. A thick coat of dust covered the whole thing, suggesting it had been there for a very, very long time. But it didn't look like trash that had been forgotten. It looked deliberate. It looked hidden. David's wife urged him to leave it, to just put the floorboards back and forget he ever saw it. But his curiosity, or maybe a sense of dread, was too strong. He couldn't just leave it there. He worked at the latches. They were stiff and resisted, caked with rust and grime. Then, with a sudden, sharp snap, they broke open. The smell hit him first. It was sharp and unnatural, not the familiar scent of decay, but something else. Something that had been preserved for far too long in a place it never should have been. He peered inside, and the reality of what he was seeing crashed down on him. Inside the suitcase was a woman. She was curled into an impossible, unnatural position, her body folded to fit the tight confines of the container. Her skin was pale and had a leathery texture, and her eyes were closed, as if she were just asleep. She was dressed in outdated hiking gear, the kind you might see in photos from another decade. Her hair was neatly done in a long braid, and around her wrist was a cracked plastic bracelet, the kind you get at an event or a camp, with a name handwritten on it in faded ink. Police records would later confirm her identity. She was a solo backpacker who had been reported missing 14 years earlier, in 2009. She was last seen setting out on a hiking trail not far from where the cabin now stood. When she didn't return, a search was launched, but it turned up nothing. The authorities at the time assumed she had suffered a tragic accident. Perhaps she'd fallen into a crevice hidden by the snow, or had a fatal encounter with wildlife. Within a few months, with no leads and no body, her case went cold. But she had never left the area. She had been right there, under that floor, the entire time. The autopsy, however, revealed a truth far more disturbing than a simple murder. The forensic examiners found no defensive wounds on her body. There were no broken bones, no cuts, no bruises, nothing to suggest she had fought for her life. Instead, the evidence pointed to something far more sinister. They concluded she had been heavily sedated, then suffocated, and then carefully, methodically sealed inside that suitcase while she was still alive. The frigid temperatures and dry air of the Alaskan wilderness had then acted as a natural preservative, slowing down decomposition and mummifying her body, keeping her almost perfectly intact for 14 years. The investigation into the cabin itself only deepened the mystery. The suitcase hadn't just been thrown under the floor. It had been deliberately hidden. The floorboards that David had pried up were newer than the rest of the cabin's construction. They had been installed years after the woman had disappeared. This fact raised a single, terrifying question. Who put them there? Trying to trace the cabin's history proved to be a dead end. The rental records were a mess, full of gaps and missing information. There were periods of years where no one could confirm who owned the property or who might have been staying there. When investigators spoke to the few locals in the nearby town of McCarthy, they were met with a wall of silence and unease. People avoided the topic. Some said that the cabin had always felt wrong, that it had a bad energy about it. Others whispered stories of hearing strange noises or movement there during the deep winter months, times when no one should have been anywhere near the isolated property. One neighbor finally admitted something truly chilling. He told investigators that years earlier, he had been out on his snowmobile late one night in the middle of a brutal January cold snap. Temperatures had dropped below -30, and the trails were all but impassable. He'd looked over towards the cabin and had seen lights on inside. Knowing it was supposed to be empty, he cautiously approached. As he got closer, the lights abruptly went out, plunging the cabin back into darkness. He never saw who was inside. As the search of the property continued, more signs emerged that someone had been using the cabin long after the woman's death. They found a hidden storage space in the wall, filled with old medical supplies, including sedatives, and stacks of old food cans with expiration dates spanning several years. This wasn't a one-time event. Someone had been coming back, repeatedly. But the most unsettling discovery of all came last. Back at the lab, as forensic technicians were carefully examining the suitcase one final time, they found something tucked into the tattered inner lining. It was a small, folded piece of paper. The ink had faded over the years, but the message was still chillingly legible. It read, "She didn't scream. She understood." To this day, the case remains officially unsolved. No one has ever been arrested for the woman's death. David Thornton and his family left Alaska immediately after their discovery and have never returned. The cabin was condemned by the Park Service, sealed off, and quietly removed from all rental listings, effectively erased from public view. The official statement is that the investigation is ongoing, but for the locals, the story is different. They say the forest didn't just give up its secret that day. It had been hiding it all along, and it waited 14 long years for someone to finally have the courage to lift up the floor. Thanks for watching. If you found this story as haunting as I did, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more mysteries.